right. Hey, folks. So I thought this time I would just take some time to talk you through the training and just kind of what I'm thinking about during the course of the session. So this has been my main exercise pretty much ever since I moved to this gym, which I think has been about 3 months now. Really enjoy it. Incline Smith machine press. Feels very stable, and I feel like it's a difficult exercise where I can get some honest progression. So the goal for today was to hit as many reps as I can with 2 plates aside, and also to do some drop sets. I really wanted every set today to be something a little bit extra. So not just a failure or close, but something extra on top. So it turns out I did get a PR on this, hit 2 plates of 13, which was nice. I'm going to probably build that up to at least 15 reps before I add more weight on. And then if you see here, I had a plate and 2 halves on, which made it easier to do a drop set. So pop the plates off and we're back to work. Now, when it comes to drop sets, you don't have to be in a massive rush. I see the way some guys do it is they get partners specifically to rip the weight off. And that's cool if you got access, but I don't think it's necessary, as long as you're just moving quickly, getting the plates off. Don't rush around so much that you hurt yourself. You're getting benefit. But yeah, so I like this style of training. I still alternate between this and higher volume stuff. But if I'm doing low volume training, I tend to resort to intensity techniques, and I try to on every single one. I just think that's good practice. So this was going to be 8 sets for the chest. And I feel if I'm doing volume at that level, for me to progress, I need to make each set really extreme. So I'm taking a good amount of rest between sets, and it's always going to be something. My personal favorites are drop sets, rest pause, and maybe mechanical drop sets, which you'll see later on in the workout. But yeah, so I think the advantage for me is I'm able to eke out every possible thing. And the way that I know I'm getting good stimulus from every set is the rep drop off. I've talked about this loads in the past, but if you're not getting significant rep drop off, I don't know how useful those sets are at a certain level. I mean, the bottom line is progression, right? But when you're at the stage I'm at, even if I'm bulking, which I am currently, I still feel like I need that extra stimulus. Otherwise, I'm just not going to progress. I mean, it's not even a feeling. Like, I know for certain, if I'm just putting in a standard number of, say, 8 sets to failure, that's not going to be enough. So, yeah, in these situations, when I am on a lowish volume phase, I'm always going to want to make those sets really count. But yeah, I sort of proved it to myself. Significant rep drop off in the second set. Reps dropped from 13 to 8. And also for this next set, I had to drop the weight down to 1.5 plates to start with. And I think I got about 8 reps here. And then I stripped off to a plate aside and repped out. So by this time, my pressing muscles were massively fatigued. So it was a good start to the workout. And that's what I want. I want every single exercise to be a heavy hitter. Like, I see guys who do rep schemes where they do, say, 10, 10, and then they do an AMRAP at the end. And I think that's, I mean, it's like fine if it was for you, right? But in my opinion, for me, that's almost the opposite of what you want to do. It's almost like you've got 2 warm-up sets, which aren't really going to provide you with a great deal of stimulus. And then you rep out, and the final set is actually somewhat useful. But I just think at that time, how much growth stimulus are you getting really from the first couple of sets? It's really 1 set to failure. I mean, I'm sure it works for some people if they're not very far along. Then, the idea is you don't need much. But then at that stage, why wouldn't you just do, say, 1 or 2 sets to failure? Because that's effectively what you're doing. So yeah, I really don't like that rep scheme. It just seems like a waste of training time. But anyway, for me, done 3 sets. So I wanted to move on to some machine work. The idea with this was drop sets and or some rest pause work. So this is a nice machine, Nautilus Nitro vertical chest. I like it because it's pin loaded, makes it easier to do drop sets, easier than racking weights. But yeah, here went with reasonably high rep range. I forget what I got in the first set. Dropped the weight, went again. I think the trick with these intensity techniques is to really push to failure on the activation set. So the first part of the set, just really go all out. Because I think the temptation is when people are doing drop sets is to get a bit too concerned with the drop and not put maximum effort into the activation set. That's why I typically don't recommend drop sets and rest pause to a lot of clients, because it's hard enough just to get people to do a straight set. Now, the thinking is if you do a drop set, you're automatically going to be more intense. But more often than not, unless you've got somebody who's very, very focused, the drop set or the rest pause is kind of a distraction. So generally speaking, what I'd say is master your straight sets to failure first. And I'd even say that should be the bulk of what you do until you need to advance it further. Like when you're advanced, like I'm saying here with me, when you're at a certain point, you're going to need the extra stimulus. So that could come from more sets, or if you don't want to do more sets, it could come from intensity techniques. But at that stage, you've got to be very aware of your training intensity. Even a guy like me, I mean, I look back at these videos, honestly, I just think to myself, I could have pushed that set a bit harder. And I think it's good to be, self-critical, because if you're not self-critical, then I think your progress may come to a halt naturally. Everyone's gonna have a plateau. But if you just look back at your training and think, oh, everything I did was fantastic, well, you're not going to have any clue as to how to fix your training. So I always try and be self-critical. I always try and have that white belt mentality, and I think everyone should. I think in the YouTube space, it's kind of seen as a weakness. People will go around saying I'm the shit and I'm not wrong ever. But I think for me, that sort of limits them. It limits their development. It limits their physique in the end. So whereas I prefer to take the attitude of, let me critically evaluate my sets and see what I can do to improve, which is what I do with my clients. And as long as you do that with no ego attached, I think it's a healthy activity. But anyway, with this, the goal was some rest pause and some drop sets. And on that note, I don't really mind which intensity technique I use. I think some exercises are more suited to some techniques. Like, for example, the press that I did just now, that's not very well suited to rest pause because I just get so much fatigue in my chest. There's very little chance that I can get a lot of reps once I've failed. So I tend to do drop sets. Whereas an exercise like this, with a short rest of, say, 10 deep breaths, like 20 seconds, you can generally get a few more reps out. But equally speaking, drop sets are quite good because it's pin loaded. So either way, the goal for the first two exercises was just to move some weight. Wasn't necessarily stretch, squeeze, blah, blah, blah. It was just to move some weight. Now with this exercise, this is my finisher. The goal here is to get a stretch, but also to get a squeeze. That position there for me is pretty much as far as my chest will go in terms of the stretch. Maybe it's just the angle, but it feels pretty deep. So I get a stretch, which is good, but I also make sure I prioritize a squeeze at the completion of the movement. And I think that's helpful. I think it's useful. For me, I get more out of squeezing an exercise like a cable crossover or leg extension or maybe a leg curl. Maybe not so much a leg curl, but certainly a leg extension. Some bicep curls, definitely tricep extensions. I get a lot from squeezing the end range in the shortened length. Whereas the focus at the moment is on lengthened work, whereas I find the short position to be quite useful too. So in this cable crossover, the goal for me was to fail on the fly portion and then to go into a press to really exhaust the chest. I personally get a lot out of presses, but I do like this exercise where I do a fly first and then finish off with a press because I find that works pretty well. But that's the goal is just to exhaust the muscle. That's for me. I'm a bodybuilder right now. Well, right now I'm a bodybuilder. The goal is to exhaust the muscle. So for you guys watching, your goal is to exhaust the muscle. I think remember the priority of the training. The priority of the training isn't just to beat your numbers. It's also to decimate the muscle too. That's important, particularly if you're doing something like this, which is low volume style training. And it's definitely true that the more weight you lift, for medium to high reps with good form, you will grow. But at the same time, to be able to grow, remember, progressive overload is both the method and the stimulus. To be able to grow, you really have to push those sets as hard as you can. I think it's safe. And then you're more likely to improve session to session. I think there's other ways to do it. I mean, right now I'm doing a low volume phase, but There are other ways to do it. You can also just do high volume. That works too. And I think naturally speaking, with higher volumes, you can get away with perhaps just going to failure, or maybe not going to failure. But then the volume has to be substantially higher. Like, I know for me, if I want to get the same training effect from sets taken either not to failure or just about to failure, I need to do a lot more volume. So for me, this is a very time efficient way of training, and it's just more enjoyable. But anyway, that was 3 chest exercises, 8 sets total. Now I moved on to delts. This is fast becoming one of my favorite delt exercises. Cable cuff laterals, really good. The nice thing about this is I'm able to do both. I can do partials like you see here. And then when I feel like I'm almost done, like partials right the way to the point where I can't even move the delts, what I'll do is I'll rest for like 10 deep breaths or 5, and I'll go again. Geez, look how big my back looks. And my shoulders, huge. I always get these comments about my traps, which is nice. Like I don't mind that. But I always think to myself, man, I'm big all over. What are you guys looking at? But anyway, so follow up with a bit of a rest pause, and then go back to straight reps, followed by some partials as well. This is good. I think, especially with exercises like this, the cable cuff laterals, because it's such a small exercise, you want to try and get the most out of it. Whereas if you think about it, something like a bench press, just the sheer weight you're using is going to cause a lot of damage, a lot of stress. If you just take it to failure, or maybe like I did, do some drop sets. Whereas an exercise like this, it's such a light exercise. I think you've got to push it all the way. And I think the side delts are such a small muscle group, you can really go to town on them. So this was 4 sets of this exercise. I'm only showing 2. And then I moved on to another side delt exercise, which again was another 4 sets. So 8 sets total for the side delts. And each of those sets was to failure and beyond with partials, and then also drop sets. And then on top of that, more failure and more partials, and it was pretty good. Like it was the delt pump was real. So after chest, to really kind of target the side delts, I think is a really good thing. I'm not a massive fan of presses, not because I don't think the press doesn't work the side delts. I think it works them fine, but I just find recovery problems. If you're like me and you're doing bodybuilder volume, even if it's like I'm doing here, I'm doing a low volume approach, but even if it's at this stage, I find it very difficult to balance the recovery from overhead presses because they hit so many different muscles. You know, and particularly the elbows. The elbows cause the most problems for me. I find elbows and shoulders get the most beating from overhead press. And that's fine. If you're doing a low volume routine, if you're doing more minimalistic style routine, then that's okay. But I think for me, if I'm doing a bodybuilder routine where I'm really trying to maximize the stress on every muscle, the overhead press just doesn't fit very well into that paradigm. So I really enjoy just specifically targeting the side delts. So you see here, this is a side delt exercise as well. It's kind of like a band pull apart, but the way that I'm angling my hands is targeting the side delts. There's probably a little bit of rear delt here as well, but I really feel it in the sides. And again, what I'm doing is I'm trying to get a stretch where my hands are in front of me, and then I'm trying to get a contraction where my hands are at the side, just to get the most out of it. And I might follow it with some partials, but really at this point in the workout, I'm pretty battered. So this was an ab exercise. This is the Atlantis ab crunch. Really good exercise. To be honest, since I've come to this gym, I've not actually done a cable crunch at all. I've just been alternating between this cable crunch and then the reverse crunch, which I'll film on a different day, but also pretty good. But this was about 4 sets. But yeah, I was very, very pleased with this workout. 8 sets for chest, 8 sets of side delts. Every set was beyond failure. And there was significant strength drop-off between the sets, between the exercises, which showed me that I was really making a strong, to use a Menzarian term, inroad into my delts. Quick pump check, looking full blown at the moment. At the moment, I'm weighing, this is 200 pounds at about 5'11", 5'10", 5'11". Yeah, the biggest I've been for a while. But for me, it was pretty easy to get to that size. Okay, this is pretty cool. I made it onto the Hall of Fame. Very nice.